subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
We've made the files the instructor uses in this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
Hello everyone and welcome to this course on Project Professional 2021 Advanced. My name is Deborah Ashby and I'm a Microsoft instructor and subject matter expert, and I'm going to be your host for this course. Now, I've been using Project for over 20 years now, so I am very aware of what a fantastic tool it is for project managers or PMOs, but I'm also aware of some of the challenges of using what is effectively a powerful but complex application. Now, this is the advanced project course, so I will be assuming that you've worked through the beginner's course already, or you come to this course with a good knowledge of project. We won't be covering many of the basics of project, instead focusing on more advanced topics like reporting, macros, consolidation and sharing, custom fields, and so much more. Project 2021 is the latest standalone release of Project from Microsoft. So if you have that version, then this course is going to be absolutely perfect. However, if you are using Project 2019 or 2016, then you'll still be able to work through the majority of this course because there aren't too many changes between the different versions. Now, this course is divided down into logical sections and lessons. There are 39 video-led lessons and 10 exercises to work through. And the exercises are there so that you can practice the skills that you've learnt in each section. You also have access to all of the course files that I use in the videos, so you can follow along with me if you choose to. Once again, welcome to this course. It's time to get started. Before we dive into the lessons, I just wanted to spend a few minutes ensuring that you are set up for success. So the first thing to do here is to make sure that you've downloaded the course and exercise files and you've stored them off somewhere that's easily accessible on your PC. Now, each lesson will have two main course files. So the one that has start in the title is the starting point for each lesson if you're following along with me. The complete file is how the file looks at the end of the lesson. So this just provides a good reference point for you. Some lessons also require the use of multiple files, but you should find everything that you need in that course files folder. Now, the exercise files are simply named exercise 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And for the majority of them, there is also an answer file for each one too. So you should have everything that you need to work through this course in those folders. Now, when it comes to working inside Project 2021, if you do want to follow along with me, it's probably going to be helpful for you to have some settings set the same as mine. So let's take a quick look at those. So open up Project. We want to go into File and down into Project Options. Now, on the General tab, a couple of things I would make sure that you have set here so that it mirrors mine is the default view. Make sure that that is Gantt with timeline. Also notice the date format that I'm using. I'm using the month, then the day, then the year, then the time. There are lots of different formats that you can choose from in here, but again, if you want to match mine as closely as possible, make sure you have your date format set to that. Now, if we jump across to the schedule page, I would also recommend you review these calendar options as well. So these are the settings that I currently have. My week starts on a Sunday, the fiscal year starts in January, and my default start and end times for a day are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m, which works out at 8 hours a day, 40 hours per week, 20 days per month. So once again, I would recommend that you change your settings to mirror mine. Now, one final thing to note here that's really important. This course was recorded in March and April of 2023, so all of the dates that you see in the videos and in the course files are very much in relation to the dates when this project was recorded. Now, I'm very well aware that you might come to this course in 6 months' time, a year's time, where these dates might not make too much sense. So you have a couple of different options here. You could adjust the start and end date of your project so it's more accurate for you, but just be aware that if you do that, you're going to need to change those dates in every single course file that you work through. Alternatively, you can just use my dates, but just be aware that the results that you get in some lessons might not exactly match mine because we're working up to different current dates. So those are the main things to be aware of. Make sure you've got those course and exercise files downloaded because it's now time to dive into our first lesson. It's time now to complete exercise 1. Now, this exercise differs from the rest of the exercises in this course in that we haven't really covered a great deal in project to facilitate a meaningful exercise. However, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of points here to make sure that you're set up correctly to complete this course. Now, the first thing you'll notice in the exercise files folder is that there is no folder for exercise 1. And that's because we aren't using any project files in this particular exercise. So if you're curious as to where that folder is, it's not supposed to be there. All I really need you to do for this exercise is once again make sure that you've downloaded and saved those course and exercise files. I want you to review the dates and decide if you want to use my dates or use your own dates. And make sure that you have reviewed your settings in project options. So that is it. I promise you that the exercises will be a lot more meaningful than this as you work through the course. So let's dive into the first lesson.
For the next section, you'll want to download the course exercise files. Click the link below in the video description to get these. You can also scroll through the details to find timestamps for each section in this course. If you're enjoying this training, please leave us a comment.
In this first lesson of this Project Professional 2021 Advanced course, we're going to take a look at consolidation and resource sharing. And we're going to look at these topics together as you often need to use them on a large project at the same time. Now, generally what happens when you're working on a project is that that project gets larger and larger over time. And sometimes it can turn into a set of projects as opposed to just one project. Or perhaps we're working on a project that needs to be split into a set of projects. And not only do we need to split up the work, the tasks, but different people are going to manage different parts. And what usually happens is that even if projects are being managed by different people, they often share the same resources. So in this lesson, we're going to look at combining multiple projects into one, or splitting a large project into separate projects and sharing resources between projects. Now, to demo this, we're going to use an example of an event. And this event really has 3 key parts. We have a gala dinner, and this is where invitees will pay an admission fee. They'll get a nice dinner, maybe there'll be some entertainment, some dancing afterwards. The next part of the event is a fashion show. So maybe we've invited local fashion houses to display their clothes at this fashion show. And they also get a buffet lunch whilst they're there. And the last part is the sports day. So this is more of a family-friendly event where people compete in different sports just for fun, and there's also a barbecue. So we have 3 very distinct parts of this one event. Now, we're going to assume that we've done some early planning. And you can see here at the top, I have a planning section. If we expand this, we can see the tasks beneath that. So we have 20 or so tasks, which we've already scheduled in relation to the planning of this big event. Now, this event is quite a large undertaking. So what we want to do is we want to split this event into separate parts with different people managing those different parts. So we might have someone managing the overall project plan. We might have somebody else managing the gala dinner, someone else managing the fashion show, and somebody else managing the sports day. Now, the individual projects are not that complicated, and we need a project manager to be able to manage their part independently and separately. So why do we need to be able to do this? Well, as you'll know from your current knowledge of project, when you're dealing with editing a single MPP file, if our project managers each want to work on it at the same time, that can become complicated, particularly if they want to work on it from home or they don't have any shared access. Now, splitting up the actual project file into effectively 4 separate files is pretty straightforward. The problem starts to occur when it comes to resources. Now, if we jump across to the resource sheet for this project, you can see that we have 8 or so resources assigned. Now, also notice that I don't have any costs assigned to these resources at the moment. We are going to talk about that a bit more later. But for the time being, just note that we have 8 or so resources. Now, resources such as volunteers, the event director, publicity officers, they might need to be able to work across all 4 of the projects. So we need to set them up as effectively shared resources. What you'll also notice if we switch back to the Gantt chart view is that many of these tasks across all of the different parts of this project have dependencies and links to other tasks in other parts of the project. So when we split this project and we set this up to share resources, we also want to make sure that we're maintaining the integrity of those links and everything links through correctly. Now, a good proportion of the work here relates to the relationships between the tasks. So let's start out first of all by just separating off the sports day section of this project. So if we scroll down, you can see here is the sports day section, so from task 46 to 56, and we're just going to select all of these tasks. Now what I'm going to do is press Ctrl C to copy those tasks to the clipboard, and then we're going to open up a brand new blank project file. Now you can go up to the File tab to do this. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl N just to quickly open that up. And then I'm going to press Ctrl V just to paste those tasks in. So now we have just the sports day tasks in this new project. Now, once you've copied these tasks across, it's worth noting that those dependencies still exist within this summary task. But remember, in the original version of the project plan, this sports day section also had dependencies in other parts of the project, and those haven't come across when we've copied these tasks. Also, if we jump across to the resource sheet for this file, notice that we now only have 2 resources because it's only bringing across the resources that are included in this part of the project plan. And you can see that the volunteer is now showing as over-allocated because we've split this section out. Now, the way that project looks at these resources is that these are completely independent of the original resources in the other project plan. So these aren't the same resources, they're 2 brand new resources as far as project is concerned. So in the next lesson, what we're going to look at is how we can share these resources across our project plans. Now, before we leave this lesson, the final thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to save off this file. So let's jump up to File, down into Save As, and I'm going to save this into the Course Files folder, and we're going to save this as charity event _ sports day, and click on Save. In the previous lesson, we discussed the reasons that you might want to split up a project or join together a project. And we recognise that it's important to deal with resources. And the key issue here is that when we split a project, we need to make sure that those projects are using the same resources. And the way that we do that is to set up what we call a resource pool. Once we've set up a resource pool, we can then share that resource pool amongst several projects. So currently we have our 2 files. And you can see that I've got them both open on the screen just here. Now, just a quick side note about project and opening multiple files. What you'll find is that if you try and double click in File Explorer to open 2 separate project files, they open in the same project window because we only have one project license. It's not like an application like Excel where you can have multiple Excel windows open to view different files. Now, the way to get around that and to arrange files like I have them here, you can see I have both of my files open in the same project window, is simply to jump up to the View tab, go over to the Window group, and you can see we have an Arrange All button just here. And that's all I've done. I've clicked Arrange All and arranged my windows so they take up half of the screen equally. So that's just a side note if you're wondering how I got to this point. So now we have both of these files open. One thing to note is that the original charity event file, which we have on the right hand side here, still contains all of the sports day tasks. Remember, we copied and pasted those into the sports day file that you can see on the left hand side. Now, we will need to remove those from the original file eventually, but before we do that, we're going to set up a resource pool. Now, the key aspects here when it comes to setting up a resource pool is that we basically set up a brand new project with resources but no tasks. And really, if this is something that you want to do, you want to try and do this at the outset of the project. So what many people will do is they'll start off with an empty MPP file, they'll enter the resources, make up the resource pool, and save the project, but with no tasks. So I've closed down the smaller sports day file, so we're just back at our original charity event file. And if we switch across to the resource sheet, we can see that we have a pretty good base for our resource pool, because we have all of our resources listed in here. So what we're basically going to do is we're going to make a copy of this file by saving it as a different name, and then we're just simply going to remove all of the tasks. So let's jump up to File and down to Save As. I'm going to save mine into the course files folder, and I'm just going to call this charity event _ resources.mpp, and let's click on save. So we're now working in that file. So let's jump back to the Gantt chart view, and what we're going to do is we're simply going to remove all of the tasks. So if we click on the square in the top left hand corner just here, it's going to select everything, and we can simply press the delete key on our keyboard. I'm getting a little warning from the planning wizard. Do I want to delete multiple selected summary tasks and their subtasks? Yes, I do. Let's click on OK, and all of those tasks are gone, but we still have our resources listed out on the resource sheet. So this is now effectively my resource pool. So let's give this a quick save, and I'm going to reopen the other file, the sports day file. So what we need to do here is we need to specify that this project uses the resource pool that we just created. So from here, we're going to switch across to the resource sheet. And remember, you can switch across using the icons in the bottom right-hand corner in the status bar, or you can jump up to View, and Resource Sheet is just here. So let's click on Resource Sheet. You can see the current resources that we have, that limited list. But if we jump across to Resource and into Assignments, we have a Resource Pool option. So let's click Share Resources, and this is where we get to select the resource pool. So from here, if we choose the second option, Use Resources, we can then choose where our resource pool is located. And the important thing to note here is that you need to have that file open in order for the drop-down to recognize it. So I still have my resource pool open. There it is, charity event _ resources. This is the file we're going to be using. And then we have options for on conflict with calendar or resource information. The pool takes precedence or the sharer takes precedence. Now we're going to look at this in a bit more detail a bit later on. But what can sometimes happen is that there may be a conflict between the resource pool and any calendars applying to the resources in the resource pool and calendars in the sharing project. So we need to specify which takes precedence, the pool or the sharer. Now, before we do this, I'm actually going to click on Cancel here because I want to demonstrate what happens to overallocated tasks when we assign a resource pool. So let's jump back to Gantt chart view for one moment. If you take a look in our tasks, you can see that task 10 is currently showing as over allocated. That's the little red icon we can see in that first column. So now if we go back to resource pool and share resources, we're going to make sure we're using resources from our charity event resources file. We're going to say the pool takes precedence. When I click OK, watch what happens to task 10. You can see that that over allocation is resolved. And that's because if we now go to our resource sheet, this project is using the resource pool and not just the two resources that were included when we copied the tasks across. So what we now have is a resource pool and a project that is using that resource pool. Now, the other thing that we need to do is we need to get the original file, the charity event project, to use the resource pool as well. So let's open it up. So we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to jump up to resource pool, share resources, use resources from the charity event resources file. And once again, the pool takes precedence. Let's click on OK. Now, notice that as soon as I did this, we now have over allocations for the Sports Day PM and the volunteer. And that's really related to the fact that we have the Sports Day event in two different files. If you recall, when we copied the tasks across, we didn't delete them from the charity event file, which is why we've got these over allocations. And we are going to deal with those in a moment, so just put that to the back of your mind. Now, what we're going to be doing over the next couple of sections is that we are going to split this charity event project up, because at the moment we've only sectioned off the sports day part of this event. But before we get on to that, just one or two important points about resource sharing. As I mentioned, if we go back to our resource sheet, we now have these over allocations. And something that can be really helpful is being able to view which resources are assigned to which projects. That can be very helpful when it comes to dealing with over allocations. So for this, we're going to switch to Resource Usage View. Let's widen out this column, and we're going to add a new column so that we can see the project that each resource is assigned to. So if we widen this out, we can see at the top we have some unassigned resources, but we can also see the projects in this column where those resources exist. And if we scroll down to the Sports Day section, I can see that the Sports Day PM, the Sports Day Project Manager, that resource is being used in both the Sports Day project file and also the original charity event file. So adding this project column into your resource usage sheet can be super helpful, particularly when you're trying to deal with over allocations and see which resources you have allocated to which projects. Now, one final point before we finish this lesson. It's not necessarily the case that all projects that share a resource pool are always consolidated into one project. You might find you have a situation where another project that is completely unrelated to this event is also using the same shared resource pool. So what I'm trying to say is when you're working with a resource pool, it might have a whole mixture of different projects that are using its resources. So just bear that in mind as we work through the balance of this section. So now it's time to move on to the next lesson, when we're going to start to split off other parts of this charity event into its constituent projects. In this lesson, we're going to set up a master project for our charity event. And we're going to start with our original project and the Sports Day project. And if you recall, these two share a resource pool. Now, when it comes to splitting a large project up, the key area where there is usually the most effort required is in restoring the links that existed in the original project. And as I've mentioned a couple of times previously, it's a good idea to make this decision very early on. So make sure that you decide if this is going to be a project that you're going to want to split up into multiple different projects as early as you can, because the later you leave it, the more work you're giving yourself. Now, I currently have the charity event project open. I'm just going to close this down and reopen it because there's a little message that appears that I think it's important that you take a look at. So let's close this down. I'm going to say yes to save changes. Now I've closed down the charity event file and I'm just back at the start screen for project, because I want to just very quickly show you what happens when you reopen these files if you have everything closed. So if we go to open, I'm going to open up my charity event file and you can see that I get this little message, open resource pool information. Now it says this file shares resources from a resource pool. What do you want to do? And I can choose to open resource pool to see assignments across all sharer files, or do not open other files. So it's basically recognizing that this file links to a resource pool in another file, and it's asking me if I want to open it. So I'm going to say yes. Let's click on OK. And now if we jump up to the View tab and go over to the Windows group, if I click Switch Windows, notice that not only do I have the charity event file open, I now have the resource file open as well, but it's in read-only mode. So I have these two files open. What I don't have open is the Sports Day file. But notice in the project column in the resource usage sheet, where I have these long path names where it says C drive users deb A, so on and so forth, this is actually the path where the Sports Day file is located. So it's still recognizing that we have links to that Sports Day file, even though I don't currently have that file open. Now let's jump back to Gantt chart view, and we're going to expand the planning section. Now I'm going to collapse up some of the other sections. So I'm going to collapse up fashion shows so that we just have sports day expanded and planning. Because what you'll notice here is that many of the tasks within the sports day section have links to tasks that are up here in the planning section. And this is where the problem can lie when you're trying to split up a project. Because effectively what we want to do is maintain the integrity of the links between different parts of the project. Now, if you recall, we separated off into a separate file the sports day tasks, and we saved those into a file called charity event sports day. So what I effectively want to do here is I want to replace these tasks in this project with the tasks from the sports day file. And we do this by inserting a sub project. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into a blank line, and we can choose this one just above, and we're going to go to the project tab, and notice in the insert group we have sub project. Now if we select this, we can then go in and browse for the file that contains the information that we want, and it's this one here, the charity event sports day file, and we can click on insert. And you can see now we get a sub-project inserted into our main project. And we can tell that this is slightly different from the other tasks in this project because we have the little project icon in the information column. I can expand the main summary task, and I get to see all of the subtasks below. Now just take a look at some of the differences between these two sections. Now if we take a look at, let's say task number 51 just here, look in the predecessors column. This particular task has a predecessor of task 10. And if we take a look at the Gantt chart, I can see it relates to task 10 in the planning section. Now, if I take a look at this same task in the sub-project, perform risk assessment, notice the predecessors column is empty. So the link effectively hasn't been maintained. So these are the links that we basically need to recreate. Now, before we get on to that, I just want to talk a little bit more about the layout up here, because what we're going to do eventually is we're going to delete out the sports day tasks in the original project, so we just have the sub-project. But I like to leave these in there so that I can use them as a guide to recreate the existing links. So, for example, if we take the first item here, task 51, I can see that its predecessor is task 10. And if we scroll up to the planning section, task 10 is book venue. So I basically want to recreate this predecessor for the corresponding task in the sports day project. So you can see here we don't currently have a predecessor for perform risk assessment. Now in project 2021, normally when you're linking tasks, you can simply click in the predecessors column and click the drop down and select your task. But notice here it's only showing me tasks that are part of this sub-project. It's not allowing me to link to other tasks within the original project. So we can't use this method. We have to use the link option on the toolbar. So let's select book venue. We're going to go down, hold down Control, and select perform risk assessment. And then on the task ribbon, we're going to choose link. Now notice a couple of things that happen here. In the predecessors column, it looks slightly different to what we normally have in here. Normally you'll just see the task number, but because we're effectively linking to another project, we actually get the entire path name in this predecessors column. But if we now take a look at the Gantt chart, so I'm going to scroll across a little bit, you can see that this particular task in our sub-project is now linked with task 10 in the main project. So we've very easily been able to maintain the integrity of that link. Now I'm pretty much going to go through and do exactly the same thing for all of these other tasks, and I'm going to be using this as my guide. So wherever we have a predecessor number, I'm basically going to recreate it for the project using the method I just showed you. So join me back here in a couple of moments once I've done that. So now that I've done that, my Gantt chart is starting to look a lot better. And one thing to remember is that you also want to run through this same process for any successors. Now, for most of these in our sports day sub-project, the successors are within the same project. But if we take a look at this one just here, sports day and barbecue, I can see here the successor is a task that we have in the planning section. Now, creating successors is pretty much the same as predecessors. The only difference is the order in which we select the tasks. So to create a successor, We need to select the tasks we want to link to first, so sports day and barbecue, and then we select the successor. So we're going to scroll up and we're going to select task 15 by holding down Control. And then we can click on Link. Task 15, the predecessor updates, but down here the successor has updated with that task. So just bear that in mind when you're linking through to your predecessors and successors. Now, one thing you might have noticed here is that we have gaps in the numbering. For example, if we take a look, we've got 1 and then it skips over 2 and we go to 3, 4, 5, 6 is missing, 7, 8 is missing, so on and so forth. Now, we are going to talk more about these gaps a bit later on, so don't worry about it for now. The final thing we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to delete out these sports day tasks. So we can simply select them, right-click and choose Delete. I'm fine to delete all of the summary and subtasks, so let's click on OK. And now we're just left with our sub-project, and all of the links should link through to earlier sections of the project. Let's give it a save. And once again, we're going to get this message pop up. And for this, you don't really have to worry about it too much. We're going to click on OK to update the resource pool to reflect our changes. We're then going to simply go to File and close this down. It's time now to complete exercise 2. And I have to say, out of all of the exercises in this course, this is probably the one that's going to take you the most time. Now, what you're going to find in the exercise files folder is the exercise 2 MPP file. And this file contains lots of different parts, so much like what we were doing in the section previously. So we have our planning section, we have the gala dinner tasks, we have the fashion show tasks and the sports day tasks. And what I basically want you to do in this exercise is to practice the skills that we've learned in this section. So I want you to split up this project into separate files. So basically, you need to create a master file. And just for reference, there is mine sitting here. It's called Charity Event All. And this master file is going to contain multiple sub-projects. And each of the sub-projects are listed below. So we have fashion show, gala dinner, planning, and sports day. You're also going to need to create a shared resource pool that all of them share together. And once again, you can see here I have a file called charity event _ resources. This is where you're going to find your resource pool, and it's the file with no tasks. So your starting file is the exercise file at the bottom. And these files here are really guides for you. They are the finished result of my workings out. Now, I don't mind what you call your files. You don't have to name them exactly the same as what I've done here. You can name them whatever you like. But I would recommend that you save all of your files into the same folder. Another point to note with these exercises is don't focus too much on getting your project to look exactly the same as mine. With project, you might have different project dates set. You might be doing this way in the future. So the dates that you see in my project are not the same as yours. You might have different options set, or you might be using specific calendars. So the focus doesn't need to be on getting your project plan to look exactly the same as mine. You just need to practice these skills so that you can apply them to your own plans. So that is it. Give it a go, and I will see you in the next lesson. So we've looked at some of the basic aspects of resource sharing and consolidation, and now we're going to look at some of the more practical aspects. Now, consolidation and resource sharing works absolutely fine if you follow a clearly defined set of rules and protocols. And in order for this to be the case, your requirements must be pretty straightforward. If your requirements are more complex, and a good example would be if you have a number of pools of resources, and sometimes you need to get resources from one place and sometimes another, or maybe you have lots of projects, then Microsoft Project isn't really going to cope with it without you being extremely careful. Because even then, we would be working in an environment where even a small slip or deviation has the potential to cause disaster. So if your requirements are even just a little bit more complicated, go for Project Server, where you can use ERP. Now, ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. And it gives us the ability to deal with shared resources from multiple pools, and it's supported in a more flexible and resilient way. So if you're looking at this and thinking, my project is more complex than this, then you really need to think about if Microsoft Project is going to be up to the job. Also, if we have a situation where, say, we have 4 project managers sharing a consolidated project and resource pool, it's very important that they all know what they're doing. Because if even one of them doesn't understand how to do this, then it can cause chaos for everybody else. So those are just a couple of points to bear in mind. Now you can see on the screen, I'm currently in File Explorer. And I have all of my files. Remember, we created these in the exercise. I have them saved off to a shared location. Now, in reality, if you're working at a company, this might be some kind of shared network drive that everybody in your company or in your team can access. Now, I'm just simply one person. I don't work at a company, so I don't have a shared network drive. But what I do have is OneDrive Cloud Storage, which again is another area where you can share files. So I've saved my files into this shared area. Now, one of the potential problems when you have project files saved to a shared network drive is the potential for conflicts. Because with a shared network drive, lots of people might have access to these files, and we could have multiple people opening the same file at the same time. So again, just bear that in mind. I'm going to show you a couple of little pointers here. So let's start out by opening Charity Event All, because all I want to do right now is just see the entire project. So let's double click to open. So first off, it recognizes that there is a shared resource pool, and it's popping up this little message asking me how I want to handle that. So it says this file shares resources from a resource pool. What do you want to do? And then we have 2 options. We can choose to open the resource pool to see assignments across all sharer files, or do not open other files. Now, the reason why we might choose the second option, do not open other files, would be a situation where maybe we're not that interested in working with or even seeing the resources. Maybe we just simply want to open the project plan so we can take a look at the schedule, maybe add a couple of tasks in, that kind of thing. So if you aren't really interested in the resources, you could select that second option. Now, the first option will allow us to see the other resources, and that's the one we're going to choose in this situation. So let's just click on OK. So it's going to open up the Charity Event All file, and I can see the master and all of the sub-projects that we have in here. Now, the reason why I can see these is because I have them all stored in the same folder location. If we just quickly jump back to File Explorer, all of the files, all of the sub-projects that are part of this master project are all in the same folder. Now let's dive into a quick scenario. Maybe I'm the project manager for the gala dinner only. And at any particular time, I only need to see the tasks and the information related to the gala dinner. So let's close down this file and just open up the gala dinner subproject. So we're going to jump back to File Explorer. There is the gala dinner project. Let's double click to open. Now note that we get exactly the same message about the resource pool. Also note, when you look behind at the tasks, some of those are ghosted or grayed out. And these are the tasks within the Gala Dinner project that either have predecessors or successors. So essentially tasks that have dependencies. Now these aren't real tasks in this project, they just represent tasks in other sub-projects. So they're really there to give me information about external dependencies. Now, once again, we're going to select the first option. Let's click on OK. So there is my project. And if we jump across to the resource sheet, I can see my resource pool, and I can use these resources in my project. And remember, as we saw before, we could jump across to resource usage view. We could add a column for project. And even though I only have the Gala Dinner project open, I can still see where those resources are being used in relation to other projects. So this is a really important point to note here. The resource pool is aware of where all of the resources are being used, even if we only have a small part of the file open. So now we have a little bit of a different situation. the project manager for the gala dinner has decided that he or she wants to work on their part of the project from home. So we're going to say that they don't have access to the shared location. Remember, this is all in the context of these files being stored on a network drive at your company. Now, as the project manager of the gala dinner, I want to be able to take all of these files home, but the other project managers for each part of this project are also taking their files home. So in order for the project manager of the gala dinner to be able to work successfully on this project from home, would he or she need to take home the resource pool as well? Well, in theory, that is possible, but in my experience, that can lead to a bit of a disaster. Because if the project manager takes the gala dinner file home and also the resources file, and they make changes to those files from home, the next day when they come into the office and load them back onto the network server, and let's say that all of the other project managers do exactly the same thing, how do we manage all of those changes? Now, of course, in theory, we could set this up so that everybody can work on it from home. And the good example here would be to save these files into something like OneDrive, as I do here. But a lot of companies still work with files that are stored on network drives. So we need to work out a way that we can do this successfully and with ease, but also make sure that everybody is aware of the implications of doing this. So what we're going to do here is let's close down the gala dinner file. We're going to reopen it. But this time we're going to select the second option, do not open other files, and click on OK. So now we have a situation where we have the gala dinner file open, but we don't have the shared resource pool. So if we go across to the resource sheet, notice that we only have 2 resources as opposed to all of our resources. And that is because we don't have the resource pool open, we don't have access to it currently. So it's only showing us the resources that are in use for the specific tasks in the gala dinner project only. And what project is basically doing here is it creates a temporary working resource sheet and only includes the resources that it knows about. So as far as project is concerned, these are local resources in a local resource sheet. So let's go in and let's make a change. So we're going to open up the prepare dinner venue task. We're going to make sure we're on the resources tab, and where we have our volunteer resource, currently that's showing us 300%. So effectively we have 3 volunteers all working at 100%. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this down to 200 and click on OK. Now notice we get a little warning next to task 12. Let's click the drop down. We have some options. I'm going to choose the second option. That's absolutely fine. Change the amount of work, but keep the duration the same. So let's choose that, and it gets rid of our warning. The other thing we might do is we might assign additional resources just here. So maybe I want to assign the volunteer that I've just freed up to the make bar arrangements task. So we're going to click in resource name. We're going to choose volunteer, units 100%. That's fine. And click on OK. Now, what about assigning a resource that we can't currently see? Remember, we can only see the gala dinner project manager and the volunteer. Maybe we want to assign someone to help with the training of the gala dinner volunteers. So let's jump back across to the resource sheet, and we're going to add a caterer resource. And we're going to assign this resource to that task. So let's jump into train gala dinner volunteers. We're going to go to the resources tab, and we're going to add our caterer. So those are the changes that I've made at home. Let's give the file a quick save and close it down. So let's pretend it's the next day. I've come back into the office and I've uploaded the files that I worked on at home to the shared network drive. So let's now open up Charity Event All. We're going to select the first option as we're back in the office. Now let's check our changes. If we scroll down to the Gala Dinner section of the project, let's jump into the Train Gala Dinner Volunteers task. We're just going to open it up and check our resources. There is the caterer that we added, so that's looking good. What about make bar arrangements? Let's double click because we made a change there. Yes, we have our volunteer assigned. And if we jump across to our resources, you can see that the caterer has now been added to the bottom of the resource pool. So effectively, the changes that we've made to this project without the resource pool being available have come across absolutely fine. In the previous lesson, we looked at some of the practical aspects of sharing and consolidation and how a project manager can work separately on a project that is part of a larger project. And in this lesson, we're going to start by looking at another important basic question. How do you maintain a resource pool? Now, we're still working in the shared location, and we're just going to open up the resource pool, which is this file just here, charity event resources.mpp. So let's double click to open it up. And what you'll notice is you get this little open resource pool dialog box, and we have 3 options that we can choose. So it says this file is the resource pool for many projects. What do you want to do? And the first option that's selected by default is Open Resource Pool Read Only, allowing others to work on projects connected to the pool. Now, before we select our option here, it's important to bear this information in mind. When we're talking about making changes or updates to the resource pool, we're actually talking about 2 different things. One type of update is where we change information in the resource pool, such as the pay rate, someone's initials, or maybe the calendar. The other type of change we could make isn't really a change to the resource pool at all. It's a change to an assignment. And in this case, it's sort of the running total that the resource pool keeps of assignments for each of its resources. So with that in mind, we're going to first select the first option in this list, Open Resource Pool Read Only, allowing others to work on projects connected to the pool. Now, if we open the resource pool using this option, we can look at the properties of the resources and maybe do things like run off reports, but we can't make changes to them. So let's select the first option and click on OK. Now you can see automatically up in the title bar, it's showing me that this file is open as read only. Now what we're effectively doing here is we're looking at a snapshot of the resource pool at a moment in time. And of course, other project managers might be working on their projects individually, and it's entirely possible that they're making changes to their project and also the resource pool. So if at any time we want to refresh the resource pool and see the changes that other people are making, we can do that. So if we jump up to the Resource tab and go to Resource Pool, notice we have a Refresh Resource Pool option just here. So if we click this, it's going to refresh it and pull through any of those changes. Now, if we ourselves are making changes to the resource pool and we want to make sure that everybody can see those, we would do a similar thing. We would jump up to Resource Pool, but we would choose the option below, Update Resource Pool. Now, it's currently grayed out for me because I haven't made any changes or updates to the resource pool, but this is the option you would choose. Now, if we go back into Resource Pool and just jump into the Share Resources option, this is going to show us all of the files that this resource pool is linked to. Now, this is more of an FYI, it's just useful information to know. Now, I'm going to cancel out of here. I'm going to close down the resource pool and we're going to reopen because we want to take a look at the second option in that list. So the second option says Open Resource Pool Read Write so that you can make changes to resource information like pay rates, etc. Although this will lock others out of updating the pool with new information. So if what you need to do here is something like change pay rates, as it says in the message, or any other fundamental change to the information about one or more resources, then you're going to need to open the resource pool in read-write mode. Now, when you do that, you don't stop others from opening projects that share the resource pool from opening their projects, but they won't be able to make changes to the resource information. So it doesn't stop them changing assignments, but they can't change any information that involves actually changing resource information itself. So if you do need to do maintenance on the information in the resource pool, then this is the option to use. Now, the third option is a variation on the second option. It says open the resource pool read write and all other sharer files into a new master project file. You can access this new master project file from the View tab, switch Windows command. Now, so far when we've been talking about project consolidation, the implication is that there is an element of permanence to this all project, the project that contains the subprojects. And we've done that on the basis that this will be something that will continue throughout the life of the overall projects. Now, in some cases, either you don't need that or that creates its own problems. For example, it restricts how users manage their own projects. So you might find it's better all round for users to keep their projects entirely separate on a day-to-day basis. So they can still share the resource pool, but the projects are not consolidated into one master project. However, it may be that maybe once a week, for example, you need to run a report and you need to run the report on all of the projects together in a master file. So these are all decisions that you need to make depending on the type of projects that you have. And I'm going to leave that for you to experiment with. Now, a final few things to cover before we leave this lesson. We've taken a look at how to share resources, but what about doing it the other way around? What about stopping sharing resources? And really the important thing to remember here is that you need to have the pool and the file open. So we're going to open the resource pool in read write, and I'm also going to open the gala dinner file. Now, as we already know, the gala dinner file shares resources. I'm on the resource sheet now, and I have my resource pool. So if we jump up to resource pool and go to share resources, what I could do here is select use own resources. I'm going to click on OK. Notice now it's effectively unlinked from the resource pool and we're only seeing the resources that are part of that gala dinner project. So let's close the gala dinner file down. I'm going to say yes to save the changes. I'm now back in my resource pool file. And if we go to resource pool and share resources, check out the sharing links below. Remember we looked in here previously. This is showing us all of the files that the resource pool is linked to. You can see that the gala dinner file is now no longer in this list. So it's no longer sharing the resource pool. Now I'm going to close down the resource pool and we're going to open up charity event all. And I'm going to say yes, open the resource pool. And notice in the project column where we can see our resources and where those resources are coming from, we now have two separate files. So the majority of these resources are using the shared pool, which is this charity event resources file. But the three resources that are part of the Gala Dinner project are now getting their resources from the Gala Dinner project instead. Now, just to finish up this lesson, let's jump back to Gantt chart view. And as we know, we're currently working in the charity all, which is showing us the master and all of the sub projects. Now, maybe at this stage we decide that we don't want the Gala Dinner sub-project to be a sub-project anymore. Maybe we just want to list out these tasks and have them part of the all project. And this is a very straightforward thing to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the sub-project, we're going to right-click our mouse and we're going to jump into information. And we're going to go to the Advanced tab, and where we have Source Project, if you notice underneath it says Link to Project. So if we want to make these just regular tasks and not a sub-project, we just simply need to deselect this and click on OK. I'm going to say yes, I want to save changes and check it out. We now just have those tasks listed as regular tasks within the All project. It's no longer an inserted sub-project. Now this can have implications further up in the schedule. If we scroll up to the planning section, some of the tasks that are part of the Gala Dinner project are now being referenced from, in this case, the planning sub-project. And what we would need to do here is to make sure that where the dependencies originally existed between the two sub-projects and now exist between effectively a sub-project of the All project and tasks within the All project, you need to go through these dependencies and make sure they're set up correctly. And one of the most important things to bear in mind here is that when you do convert a sub-project back to regular tasks, that is not reversible. So I always recommend it's a good idea to take a backup copy of your file in case you decide at any stage that that's not what you wanted to do. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can set up recurring tasks, as this might not be something that you've come across before. And we're going to use the example of a progress meeting. So in this scenario, it might be that every month, let's say the 29th of each month, we get the team together for a progress meeting. And that meeting is going to last 3 hours and it occurs in the afternoon from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. So if you were managing a project, let's say, which lasts roughly a year, you would also be managing 12 progress meetings. Now, we could schedule these meetings individually, but it's a lot more time efficient to set them up as recurring tasks. But you have to be aware that if you are going to set these meetings up as recurring tasks, you need to be in a situation where there isn't much variance from a pattern. And what I mean by that is you know for sure that that meeting is going to occur on the 29th of every month, and the duration is going to be 3 hours from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Now, of course, there are natural variations. For example, the 29th of the month might not always be on a working day. It could be at the weekend. Now, Project will deal with any situation like that, so we don't really need to worry about that too much. But if in fact what you find is that every month your boss wants to move the meeting to a different date, maybe the 24th or the 27th, then setting up a recurring task might not be the most efficient way to do this. So what I'm trying to say is that there needs to be a reasonably consistent pattern to your tasks. Now, before we get into setting up our recurring tasks for this project meeting, I just want to demonstrate something that surprisingly a large number of people don't generally get to do in Project. And that is to use times as well as dates for our start and finish. Now, what I mean by that is when you're adding tasks or maybe setting the start date of your project, most of the time we're working with days. We won't generally schedule tasks between 2 times. It will always be a task that has a duration of 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, 5 days, so on and so forth. But for this, we are going to jump into the options and we're going to add in time element to our start and finish times. So I'm currently working in the recurring task project file, which you can find in the course files folder. And I'm in Gantt chart view, and I'm just going to widen out the duration column because we're going to add in a longer date format. So let's click on file. We're going to go down to options. And on the general page, if you take a look in the date format field, you can see this is the date format that I'm currently using. So I'm going to change this to add in the time component as well. So I think I'm just going to use this date format just here. And let's click on OK. And we're going to see that reflected when our recurring tasks are added into the schedule. So now it's time to add our recurring task. We're going to jump to the task ribbon, and then all the way over in the insert group, we're going to click the drop down underneath task and choose recurring task. So we need to give our task a name. So this is going to be a project meeting. The duration is currently set to 1 day. Now, we don't want this meeting to be a 1-day meeting. It's going to be a 3-hour meeting. So I'm going to type 3H in here. I then get to choose the recurrence pattern. So is this occurring daily, weekly, monthly, yearly? This is a monthly meeting, so I'm going to choose monthly, and then I can choose the detail of that recurrence. So I could choose to set this to recur on a specific day of every month, for example. Or I could choose to schedule this meeting on the 2nd Wednesday of every month, or maybe the 3rd Monday of every month. So you can really get quite granular about your recurrence information just here. Now we're going to say that we want this meeting to occur every month on the 29th. So let's add in 29 just there, of every 1 month. And then underneath, we get to specify the range of recurrence. Now, currently, the default start date here is just the start date of my project. And the actual date that you have in here, the start date, doesn't matter too much because Project will work that out based on today's date. But we do need to change the time just here. Otherwise, it's going to schedule all meetings at 8 a.m. in the morning. So we can leave the start date as it is, but we do need to change this information over here. So I'm going to say I want this to start at 2 p.m. We then get to choose if we want to end after a specific number of occurrences. So maybe I'm only scheduling this project for the next 6 months. So I could say I want to end this after 6 occurrences. Now, I don't want to do that in this case. I'm going to choose a specific date. So let's click on End By, and I'm going to use the date picker, and we're just going to schedule these until the end of the year. So I'm just going to select the 31st of December. And I'm going to add onto the end here, 5 p.m. The final thing at the bottom here is to choose a calendar for scheduling this task. Now, for the time being, I'm just going to choose the standard calendar and click on OK. Now, notice I've got this little pop-up warning message that tells me 2 of the 7 project meeting tasks will occur during non-working times. So that means that the 29th of the month has fallen on a non-working day, so a Saturday or a Sunday based off of my standard calendar, twice. So I now need to tell Project how I want to deal with that. So I have a few different options. It says project can reschedule the task to occur at the first available working time. To reschedule the two-task occurrence, click Yes. So if I was to click Yes here, then project is going to reschedule both of those tasks that fall on a non-working day to the next available time on the next working day. So we can safely say that if my tasks fall on a weekend, if I was to choose Yes here, then project is going to schedule them for the next working day, which is going to be Monday. Now, if I was to choose No down here, it's not going to create the two task occurrences. So it's not going to create them at all. So maybe we decide that for those meetings that do fall on a weekend, we're just not going to have a meeting. I could choose No. The final option, Cancel, is if I just decide that I want to cancel out of what I'm doing and not create any tasks, I can just choose Cancel. Now in this instance, I'm going to get project to reschedule the two task occurrence. So let's click on Yes and see what we get. Now, if we take a look at the start column just here, we can see that most of these project meetings have been scheduled on the 29th, but we can see our two exceptions. We have one here which has been rescheduled to July the 31st at 8 a.m. in the morning, and then we have this one down here which has been rescheduled to October the 30th. So the majority of my tasks have been rescheduled correctly. But I will now have to go in and deal with these two exceptions so that they reflect accurately, because we don't want these occurring at 8 a.m. in the morning. So let's click on the first task that needs to be rescheduled, which is this one just here. We can right click and go into information, and now we can just adjust the time. So I'm going to change this again to 2 p.m. and the end time to 5 p.m. and click on OK. So that one now looks a lot better. I'm going to do exactly the same for this task just here. So let's right click, information, and make our changes. So there we go. Pretty simple and straightforward. But again, it is worth noting that if each meeting that you want to schedule has significant differences, maybe completely different times of the day, then creating these individually as opposed to setting them up as recurring tasks is probably going to be more efficient for you. Now, another thing to note, if we decide at some stage that maybe this meeting is going to last 2 hours as opposed to 3, and we right click and go into the information for the first task just here, if we were to change the duration up here to 2 hours, just know that it's going to basically recreate every single task in this list. So if you did make any changes to exceptions like we just did, you're going to have to go back in and redo those. So that's just really a point to note. And another little thing to note here before we finish this lesson is that if you do go in and create recurring tasks, you don't necessarily have to create them just to the end of your project. You can extend them further than the project end date. Just bear in mind that if you do this, it is going to extend the overall duration of your entire project. So just be aware of that as well. Now, when we do have our meetings scheduled, as we do here, you can see we have a project at the top, which has a little arrow next to it, which means it is collapsible and expandable. And project has helpfully named all of these individual projects with a number, so 1, 2, 3, 4, to make them easy to identify. Now, the very final thing to note here is that we can also assign resources to our meetings. So what I could do here is click the project meeting at the top, right click and choose Assign Resources. And I have 3 resources already included in my resource sheet, and I want to assign all 3 of these resources to the meetings. So what I can do is I can hold down Control to select multiple resources. So let's click the first one, hold down Control, select the second one and the third, click on Assign. And now when I click on Close, I can see in the Resource Names column, I now have all of those resources assigned to every single recurring meeting. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can create custom fields. And it's probably the case that you have seen and used many of the fields associated with tasks and resources before. So fields associated with tasks would be things like its duration, its start and finish times. And you can see those fields on the screen right now for this new project that we're going to be working on. So fields in project are essentially columns. Now, in some cases, it might be that you'll specify values yourself, and sometimes project does it for us. For example, if we set up a task starting on a particular date, and then we create another task with a dependency on the first, say it's going to start 20 days after the first task, Project will calculate the start date for us. It will also calculate things like the amount of work involved in a task based on the duration, number of resources, and so on. So the number of fields that we already have within Project is pretty large. But in any particular situation, there might be other information that you want to store or see in your project. So we do this using custom fields. And there are so many different things that we can do with custom fields. Now, as you'll see in a moment when we dive into this, Project provides a set of dummy fields that we can use as the basis of our own custom fields. So we're going to look at a very simple example of how to create a custom field, and it will really give you an idea as to the type of things that you can do with them. So we're going to set up a very common scenario. Many project managers these days keep information about the tasks in a project and they call it RAG status. Now, what RAG stands for is effectively red, amber, and green. And it's a really simple indicator of how a task is going in a project. So the way that this works is that for each task in a project, it's given a RAG status. So if something is going well and it's on track, we might give it a RAG status of G for green. If something's got issues, it might get a status of A for amber. And if we have a task where things are going horribly wrong, we're over budget, we're behind schedule, then we might decide to give that task a status of R for red. Now, the way that people assign these statuses can vary. Some people do it manually and do it on a task-to-task basis, but in other cases, these values will be calculated based on the current performance of the project. Maybe how far overtime is this project, or how far out of budget have the costs gotten. Now, for this particular lesson, I'm going to demonstrate setting up a RAG status for use manually. And we're going to set up this new RAG status custom field, and then we're going to assign values for the project based on my own assessment of the state of each task. So the project that we're going to be working on is a new website for a company called National Farm Foods. Now, the details of this project don't really matter in this example, but it is just a simple representation of the building of a website. So let's set up our custom field. So for this, we need to jump up to the Project tab, and in the Properties group, we have a Custom Fields button. So let's click on this and see what we get. Now, it's worth noting right at the top here, we can create a custom field for a task, a resource, or a project. Now, we're creating a custom field for tasks, so we're just going to select this first option, and then we can choose the type of custom field that we're creating. And you can see that we have a number of different options in the drop-down just here. Now, we're creating a RAG status task, which means I want to see either R, A, or G in the column. So that is text, so our type is going to be text. And then just below that, in the fields area, we have all of our dummy custom fields, and you can see that we have 30 of them that we can modify and use. So currently they just have the generic name, text 1, text 2, text 3, so on and so forth. And to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter which one of these you choose, but let's keep things logical. We're going to select text 1 at the top. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to rename this field. Now, we can double click to rename it, or we can just select the rename button underneath. So I'm going to give this a more meaningful name so I can identify it a bit better, and we're just going to call it RAG. Let's click on OK. You can see it now renames it, but we still have text 1 in brackets, so that just lets him know the type of field we're using when we're working with our custom field. Also, note below we have some other buttons, so we can delete fields from here. So if you want to get rid of one, you can do that. We can even import fields from other applications. The next set of options that we have are custom attributes. And you can see we have a choice of none, lookup, or formula. Now, if we were to choose none, it basically means that we're allowing the users to type whatever they like in the field. So instead of just typing R, A, or G, they could type anything they wanted into that field. Now, that's not what I want. I want to lock this down a little bit so that they can only type R, A, or G. And that is where we would use the second option, the lookup option. Because with this option, we can provide a list, and the only thing users are going to be able to do in that field is select an option from that list. The final option is formulas. So if we wanted to add a formula which does a calculation in this field, we could do that from here also. Now we're going to choose Lookup, and this is where we get to define what we want to see in that drop-down. Now the order in which you type these is entirely up to you. But in general, I tend to like to have the one that's probably going to be the most commonly used at the top. So for me, I think that's probably going to be green. So I'm going to type G in here, and then we can give it a description. And the description is going to be progress good. The next one is going to be A for amber. I'm going to say that this is a warning, so maybe something we need to check on. And the final one is going to be R, and we'll just say that there are issues with this task. Now note that if you do want to rearrange these, you can simply select them and you have little move buttons at the top, so I could move that up to reorder it or move it back down. We also have some buttons just above which will allow us to copy and paste if we want to make copies of these. We can insert rows, things like that. And then underneath this little table, notice we have a little checkbox that says use a value from the table as the default entry for the field. So once again, if you think that one of these is going to be way more common than the others, then you might want to select it. So for example, G for progress good, and click on set default. And you can see that that changes color, which means that this is the default option. We can also change the way that we're displaying the order in this lookup table. So currently I'm displaying these by row number, so they're going to show 1, 2, 3 in the drop down, or I could choose to sort these ascending or sort descending alphabetically. And then the final option that we have down here are our data entry options. And it says allow additional items to be entered into the fields. And those values will be added to the lookup. So again, if we want to allow our users to be able to effectively modify what they're seeing in the drop down and just type something in and have it become part of this list, then we could choose this option. Now, I don't want to do that in this case, so we're just simply going to click on Close. The next little group of options that we have, calculation for task and group summary rows. So these options here relate to calculations. So if we take a look at our project, let's take a look at the development task and its subtasks in the project. So tasks 13, 14, 15 and 16. So the development summary task has 3 subtasks. So what this basically relates to is if I give all 3 of these subtasks a RAG status of G for green, do I want the summary task, the development task, to get a status of G as well? Or what about if I have a different status applied to each of the subtasks? How do I want that to reflect in the summary task? Do I want it to average out to work out the status for the summary task? So that is what these options relate to just here. Now in this case, we're just going to leave as on none. The next option, calculation for assignment rows. Now once again, we're just going to leave this on none. And then the final group here, values to display. Now currently I have this set to data, which means it's going to display an R, an A or a G. But if I wanted to make this more graphical, I could add graphical indicators to represent those values. And I could choose if I want to add them for non-summary rows, summary rows, and if I do select this option, I can also select that summary rows inherit the criteria from non-summary rows. So this is where we could come in and we could add an image just here. So for example, I could click the drop down in test for RAG and I could say that if it equals, let's say G for green, I could assign an image. So let's choose a green circle. If it equals an A for amber, then we want to have, let's say, an orange circle. And if it equals R for red, then we're going to have a red circle. Now, you don't have to do this. I'm just showing you this as an example. Let's click on OK. So now let's click on OK to create our custom field. And to get that field to display, we just need to add a new column. So I want my RAG status column to appear somewhere around here. So let's select the duration column, go up to Gantt chart format, and we're going to insert a column. And then we can go through, and if we scroll down to R, we should find our RAG custom field. There it is just there. Let's select it and check out what we get. Because we set the green one as the default, that's why we're seeing green in here. But I could change this by clicking the drop down, and maybe I want to change this to A for warning, and we get our orange graphical representation. Now remember, if you just wanted R, A and G in here, you didn't have to set up these graphical indicators. So I'm going to set this to progress good. Let's say that this one has some issues or warning, and we'll just carry on adding a RAG status for each of these tasks. And it's entirely up to you if you want to manually add a status for the summary task as well. I'm just going to add them for the subtasks all the way down to the bottom, and we're going to do most of these as progress good. So that is how you can set up a custom field and use it in your project. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can add a custom field into our project that shows the RAG status of each task. And the way that we did that was that we entered our RAG status manually. If you recall, after we added the column, I then went through and selected the RAG status manually from the drop-down for each of the tasks. But as I mentioned in the previous lesson, aside from doing that manually, we might decide that we want to automate the calculation of values for a custom field. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this particular lesson. And we're going to stick with our RAG status field, but this time the values are going to be calculated. And there are many ways that people calculate RAG status. This can be based on numerous different things. It might be based on time performance or maybe cost performance. And we're going to create a calculation based on cost performance. Now you can see here that I have version 2 of this project on the screen. And version 2 differs from version 1 very slightly. So we're going to set up this scenario that the project isn't going particularly well. Everything in the original project plan was behind schedule and going well, but now some things have happened and we've had to update our project to reflect the new status of each task. And version 2 reflects the new status of the project. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here before we get on to the calculations part of this lesson is I'm going to change the RAG status column to use text as opposed to these graphical indicators. So this is just a good opportunity for you to see how you can switch between these two representations of the RAG status. So I'm going to select the RAG status column. Let's go up to Gantt chart format and custom fields. Now, if I don't want to show these graphical indicators, I just want to see the R, A, or G, all I need to do is come down to where it says values to display and change this from graphical indicators to data. So let's select that option, click on OK, and we now get our text as opposed to those graphics. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to calculate our RAG status based on cost. So the first thing we need to do here is we want to make sure that we're displaying the cost table. Now I have the cost table displayed. If you're not sure how to do this and you're in a different view, if you jump up to the View tab, go to the Data group, we have a Tables drop down just here. So you just want to make sure that you're clicked on Cost. You might find that you're clicked on Entry instead if you can see all of your tasks. So we want to display the cost table. Now, one thing I want you to take a look at here, if we extend this out, is the variance column. We can see that quite a few tasks have a positive variance, i.e. they're currently running over budget. And that really does make sense, because in this project plan, in this version 2, I've actually extended the duration of some of the tasks in this project. And with an extended duration, it means that we require resources for a longer period of time to work on that particular task. And that, in turn, pushes the costs up. So it's not really a surprise to see that we have quite a few positive variances in here and that quite a few tasks are running over budget. If you look at task 5, for example, requirements definition, we can see that the variance is just over $2,000. Task 10, analysis and design, that's just under $1,000. And there are a couple of other tasks in here as well that are also running over budget. For example, task 14, graphical resources and branding, that's slightly over budget at $90. So we're going to calculate the RAG status based off of the variance. And the rule that I'm going to apply is that anything that has a cost variance of 0 or less, i.e. the currently planned cost doesn't exceed the baseline cost, any of those tasks, the RAG status will be G or green. For any task whose cost variance is positive but doesn't exceed $1,000, the status is going to be A or amber. And for all of the other tasks where the cost variance exceeds $1,000, the status will be R or red. So let's set up a second custom field. So let's go to the Project tab, Custom Fields, and this time we're still working with tasks. We're going to choose the next one in the list, Text 2. And we're going to rename this to Rag Auto so we can differentiate it from the original. Now, when it comes to the custom attributes, this time we're going to use a formula to calculate the rag status. So let's click on the Formula button. Now, this little formula dialog box that pops up is very similar to the expression builder in Excel if you've ever used that. You can see we have our mathematical symbols underneath, so plus, minus, multiply, divide. We have our operators. We have a little drop down list where we can choose different fields to work with. And we also have a list of functions, and these are categorized by type. Now, the formula that we're going to set up here, we're going to do it in two parts. And the first part of this formula is going to allow me to identify all of the G's in the rag status column. So any task that's flagged with a G for green. Now, we know that a status of G can be identified by anything that has a cost variance of 0 or negative. So let's click the functions drop down, and the function that we're going to use is the if function. So again, if anybody out there is an Excel user, this might be a function that you're already familiar with. And the if function is a logical function. It allows us to perform a test, and then it outputs a value of true or false, and we can add meaning to that true or false output. Now, that's all a bit complicated at this stage, so let's work through it slowly. I'm going to go into general because this is where we have our if expression. And notice here, it does look a little bit different if you're using it in Excel, but the formula is basically the same. So let's select if from the list, and notice in this formula we have expression, true part, false part. So the expression part is where you're performing your test. And then we choose what we want to output if that test is true, and what we want to output if that test is false. So what is our expression going to be? What is our logical test? Well, for this first part, what I want to say is if the cost variance is greater than 0. So I'm going to select where it says expression. We're going to delete that out, and we're going to replace it with a field. So let's click the drop down. We're going to go to cost, and we're looking for cost variance. And what we're saying is if the cost variance is greater than 0, and then we can define what we want it to do. Now, for this first part here, this true part, I'm just going to put a little placeholder in here because we're actually going to work through this in the second part of this formula. So for the time being, I'm just going to put in quote marks X. And for the false part, we're going to put G. So let's work through this because if you've never seen this before, this can look pretty complicated. So what we're basically saying here is if the cost variance is greater than 0, if that is true, output an X. If it's false, output a G for green. So if I was to click OK on this formula, what I'm basically going to see in the rag auto column is an X for positive values and a G for negative values. So let's try it out. Let's click on OK. Now you might see this little warning message pop up. It basically tells you that anything that's currently in the rag auto field is going to be overwritten by this formula. Now in this case, that is totally fine. So let's click on OK and OK again. So let's go up to Gantt chart format and we're going to say insert column. And this time we're looking for rag auto. And there it is just there. So notice what we get. If we take a look at this first one, requirements definition, I have an X in the rag auto field. And if I take a look at the variance, I can see that this is a positive variance. So this is over budget. The next one, for example, is showing G in the rag auto status column, and that's because the variance is 0. Remember, anything that's greater than 0 is going to show an X and everything else will show a G. The same thing down here. Analysis and design, we have an X, and that's because we are over budget on that one. Design sign off has a variance of 0, so that is effectively on budget. We have a G. So far this formula is working correctly. But I need to take it a stage further because I don't want to have X in the rag auto column. I want it to display G, A, or R. So we need to modify our formula and add in another condition. So let's jump up to Custom Fields, select Rag Auto, and we're going to click on Formula. And we're going to go back in and simply edit our formula. Now what we effectively need to do here is turn this into a nested if statement. And again, if you are an Excel user, this might be something that you're already familiar with. So we want to replace this X part with another if formula. So we're going to delete it out. We're going to go to Function, into General, and we're going to select if to add another one in. Now our expression this time, let's delete that out, is going to be if the cost variance is greater than $1,000. If that's true, we want to output R, or red status. If it's false, we want to output an A for amber status. So working through this formula, the formula is first going to check if the cost variance is greater than 0. If that's false, it's going to output a G. If it's true, it's then going to move on to the next and check if it's greater than 1,000, and it's going to assign R or A based on that calculation. Anything else, it's going to assign a G. So let's click on OK and OK again, and we can now see that our values have been updated. So this one just here has an automatic RAG status of R because the variance is greater than 1,000. If we take a look at something with a RAG status of A, we can see that it's greater than 0, but not greater than 1,000. So that is how that formula calculates. Now the final thing I'm going to do here, because I don't want to have both of these columns in my table, is I'm going to simply hide the original RAG column. So let's right click and choose Hide Column, and then I'm just going to switch back to my entry table view. And I'm going to quickly add another new column to display my RAG auto status in this view as well. So let's scroll down, RAG auto, and there we go. In the previous lesson, we set up a RAG auto custom field, and the value for the custom field for each task was calculated using a formula. And as I pointed out in that lesson, the formula that you can create can be pretty sophisticated. There are lots of different options if you have a little look around. And in setting up that formula, we used nested if statements. Now, there is a very good alternative to using nested if statements, which can make things simpler and also allows us to deal with situations where we have more than 3 values. So that's what we're going to take a look at in this lesson. We're going to edit the RAG Auto custom field, and we're going to use a different formula. So let's click on the Project tab, and we're going to jump into Custom Fields and make sure that we have RAG Auto selected. And we're going to click on the Formula button, and in there we still have our nested if formula. Now we're going to replace this formula with a more flexible formula called switch. And again, if you are an Excel user, then you might be familiar with this function. So let's delete out everything that we currently have in there. Now you can simply type the formula in, but if you prefer to get those little prompts for the arguments, then jump into Function, go down to General, and there is the function that we're going to use, switch. Now the switch function allows us to create multiple expressions, so more than the 3 that we did using the nested if statements. And you can see that these arguments kind of come in pairs. We have expression 1 and then value 1, expression 2, value 2. And we could carry on going, expression 3, value 3, so on and so forth. So we're going to double click to select expression 1, and we're still working with the cost variance field. So we're going to insert our cost variance field, and we're going to say if this is less than or equal to 0, the value we want to output is going to be G, or green. So basically anything with a negative cost variance is going to have a RAG status of G. We can then complete this for expression 2. So once again, we're working with cost variance. If this is less than or equal to $1,000, the value is going to be A. And then finally, we're going to add another one. If the cost variance is greater than $1,000, Then we're going to output an R. And of course, if we had more options, we could simply carry on going, setting up these different pairs, logical test, and then the output. Now we're going to stop there. It's all we need for our example. Click on OK. And what you should notice is that when I click on OK again, there should be absolutely no change in the RAG auto field because we're effectively doing the same calculation. We're just using a different formula to do it. So let's click on OK. And like magic, nothing changes, so our formula is working. It's also worth bearing in mind that when you do click on OK, Project does do a syntax check of your formula. So if you've typed something in incorrectly, you are going to get a warning message come up. If you don't see anything, then you can safely assume that your formula is good. Now, because there are so many different types of formulas that you can do in Project, and you want to learn a little bit more about this, we definitely don't have time to cover all of them in this course. But something that can be really helpful is to jump into the help files and just search for project functions for custom fields. And the top link here, if we open this up, it's going to give us a whole heap of information about the different functions for custom fields, and it's going to go through them all with an explanation. So it's definitely worth having a little read through these help files if this is something that you think you're going to be using all the time in Project. Now, the final thing we're going to do here is we are going to re-add some graphical indicators, but we're going to make them slightly different to before. So let's go to the Project tab and Custom Fields. We're going to make sure that we have our RAG Auto field selected. We're going to change this to Graphical Indicators, and we're going to click on the button. And then we're going to jump in here and we're going to add some squares this time. So let's choose equals. If the value equals G, the image we're going to use is this green square. We're going to say equals again. If it's A, we're going to have an amber square. And then finally, if it's equal to R, we're going to have a red square. Also note underneath, we have this little option selected, Show Data Values in Tooltips. Now I do recommend that you keep this selected. Let's click on OK and OK again. And we can see that those have now applied. They're looking lovely. But what exactly is that tooltips option? Well, if I hover my mouse over any of these indicators, it will show you the underlying value. So if I hover over one of these, let's go for this one just here. I don't know if you can see, it sort of very briefly flashed. Now, that's got something to do with the fact that I'm recording the screen. For you, when you hover your mouse over this and you're not recording, you'll be able to actually see the value that sits underneath the graphic. So I do recommend having those turned on, can be super useful. So that's it for this section on custom fields. We've seen a couple of different examples there, but of course there are so many different formulas left for you to explore. It's time now to complete exercise 3. And in this exercise, we're going to create a custom field for a project that you haven't seen yet. And this is a reasonably basic building project. The schedule isn't quite finished and we haven't assigned any resources as yet. But we are almost at the end of the planning stage and we've saved a baseline, but we've had to change some of the estimates. So now that we've changed some estimates, we get a finish variance for some of the tasks in the project. And you can see those in the Finish Variance column in the exercise file. Now, this is your starting point for this exercise. If you take a look in that column, you'll see that many of the tasks don't have a variance. For some of them, it might just be 2 or 3 days. And for a few, it's 5 days or more. So what I'd like you to do in this exercise is I want you to flag the tasks that have a variance of 5 days or more so that we can address that before we go on to the next stage of planning. Now, the way that I would like you to do this is to create a custom field of type flag. So if you check each of the types, you'll see that a flag field is a data type of yes, no. And I'd like you to make sure that the value of yes is set for any task where the finish variance is 5 days or more. And I'd also like you to set this for the appropriate summary task as well. So if a summary task has a finish variance of 5 days or more, I'd like to have the value of yes also. The next thing I'd like you to do in this exercise is I would like you to indicate graphically each of the tasks and summary tasks with a finish variance of 5 days or more in the Gantt chart using an icon. So a couple of things for you to practice in this exercise. Now, before you dive straight in, there's just a couple of really important things that I want to mention here, which are really going to help you when you're completing this exercise. In Project 2021, durations are stored in minutes. So if you want to check the value of finish variance, you need to do that in the terms of minutes. So when I say 5 days, that's 5 working days. So in a project where the defaults are still in force, 5 days is 40 hours, which is 2,400 minutes. Now, this is going to be important when you're completing this exercise. And I'm not going to give you too many clues or hints because I really want you to have a think about this yourself. But just bear in mind that when you're dealing with durations, be aware that they're stored in minutes. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So here is my answer. You can see that I've moved the columns around a little bit so that we have finish variance at the start here, and we have a new column called week late. And notice in this column, whenever there is a finish variance of 5 days or more, we have this little red diamond icon. So that just lets me know which tasks I need to focus on. So you should have ended up with something that looks like this. Remember, your dates might be different, so you might have a slightly different result. But if you can see the week late column and the graphical indicators are appearing where they're supposed to appear, you can safely assume that you've completed this exercise correctly. And of course, if you're unsure, then you'll find this file in the exercise files folder. Take a look at the field and see what I did to achieve this result. That's it for now. I will see you next time. In this lesson, we're going to start to take a look at outline numbering and WBS codes because these might be things that you're not familiar with. So let's start out with outline numbering. Now, in this lesson, we're going to use the example of a house build project. Now, this project isn't complete, but there is enough information in it for the purpose of this lesson. And the thing about house build projects is that they're normally very structured and they're also normally very similar. So most house build projects will have tasks included similar to the ones that you can see here. Now, something that's not particularly obvious when you're just looking at this project is that behind the scenes, Project 2021 is keeping a list of outline numbers for us. So let's take a look at them for this project. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a column just here. And we're looking for outline numbers. So let's scroll down. There it is. And now we can see our different outline number levels. Now, this is very simple number formatting, but let's just walk through it so you understand. So you can see here the task number 1, our top level summary task, site, has been given an outline number of 1. The next task, task 2, which currently says clear site, has been given an outline number of 1.1. And that's because task number 2 is effectively a subtask of task number 1. We can see that it's been indented, which gives us our outline number of 1.1. The next task, task number 3, set out, that's on the same indentation level as clear site. So the numbering is going to follow on from that point. So set out is now 1.2. And you can see that this numbering structure continues throughout this project plan. And currently, pretty much all of the tasks that we have in this plan are either level 1, the summary task, or level 2. So we're not really going beyond 8.1, 8.2, 8.3. Now let's see what happens when we introduce another task into the middle of the schedule. So I'm going to select where we have task 3. And we're going to insert a task, and this task is going to be called trim. Now this task needs to be a subtask of clear site. So let's jump up to the task ribbon and we're just going to indent this task. So check out what happens to our outline numbering now that we've introduced a third level. Trim has been given an outline number of 1.1.1. And then the numbering for task 4 goes back to 1.2 because this is outdented compared to trim. If I was to insert another task directly under trim and indent it to the same level, that task would be given an outline number of 1.1.2. So this is fairly standard outline numbering that I'm sure you've come across at some point in your career. Now, the good news about this outline numbering is that Project 2021 does all of the maintenance for us. So as we make changes to the schedule, add tasks, delete tasks, it's going to automatically update the outline numbering to reflect the new structure. So what exactly is the point of having outline numbers? Well, we can use them to uniquely identify a task in a project. For example, if you wanted to relate materials to a particular task, maybe we're ordering steel for the steel frame, you can see down here, task number 21. When we order that steel, maybe we want to make sure people know which particular project and task the steel was meant for. So to do that, we could provide them with the name of the project and also the outline number. So outline numbers can be useful in that respect, but they also give your project structure. Now, this in theory all sounds good, but in practice, the use of outline numbers can have problems. Now, if you have a very fixed structure on your projects and you're reusing the same structure and there is rarely a need to change it or vary it, then this can work. However, if you need something that can deal with variations with the addition of new tasks, then it doesn't work too well. So when we started this project, if we just scroll back up to the top, Site had an outline number of 1, Clear Site had an outline number of 1.1, etc. And they still have those outline numbers. And if you recall, we inserted the trim task into the schedule and everything numbered correctly. But supposing that trim had to go into the schedule, but it wasn't a subtask of Clear Site. Instead, it was a subtask of Site. So let's give that a go and see what happens. So I'm going to select the trim task, and what we're going to do is we're going to outdent it so it's on the same level as Clear Site. So now that we've done that, and all subtasks underneath the site summary task are on the same level and all the numbering looks as if it's working and flowing through correctly, one thing that has happened is that the numbering has changed. For example, for task number 4 set out, when we modified the indentation level of trim just above, it changed the set out task number from 1.2 to 1.3. So the addition of new tasks and the changing of the indentation will renumber other tasks in your project to accommodate those changes. Now, this might be absolutely fine for the project that you're working on, but in some cases, having volatile numbers that can change depending on the changes that you're making to the schedule is not really what you want. Sometimes you want to assign a unique number to a task and have that number follow that task no matter what else is going on in the schedule. And that is where WBS codes come in. So let's take a look at the default WBS codes for this particular project. So let's insert another column. And we're going to choose WBS from this list. So this will be near the bottom. There we go. And we can see the default WBS codes. Now, WBS codes are the same, really, as outline numbering by default. But we can customize the WBS codes to make them more relevant to the project that we're working on. And if you're wondering where WBS codes originated from, they originally came from government work and US military work. And the idea was not only to be able to identify the tasks in a project using a coding system, but also to do things like relate WBS codes in one project to WBS codes in another project. So a lot of the time, if you were a project manager, you'd be given a set of standard WBS codes to use, and you need to set them up in your project to conform not only to government requirements, but often to international standards. And WBS codes are still used and they're very common in the public sector. Now, one key aspect of WBS codes is that they don't often look as simple as this. The coding system is more complex and it's more specific to the project. So if you were given a set of WBS codes to use in a project, you'd need to know how to customize them. And that's what I'm going to show you next. Now, also another thing to note before we begin, with these standard WBS codes that you can see in this new column that we've added, check out what happens here. So the first one, the summary task for site, is 001. Clear site 001/A. Now you'd think that the next one would be 001/B, but it's not, it's E. Now this has something to do with what I was talking about earlier in the fact that WBS codes are more fixed and travel with their task, as opposed to project changing the outline numbering when we start moving and deleting tasks. So this is why we're seeing E just here, and I'll talk about this more a little bit later on. Now let's take a look at how we would customize these WBS codes to make them a little bit more meaningful to this particular project. What we're going to do is jump up to the Project tab, and in the Properties group we have WBS Define Code. So this is where we can set up exactly how we want our WBS codes to look. Now the first field we need to complete is the project code prefix. Now this will in general help us identify which project these WBS codes belong to. So this is a house build project and we're working in the 01 file, so I'm going to say that the prefix for all of these codes is going to be HB01-, and then we're going to have our numbering system. Now we define our different numbering levels in the code mask area below, and we're going to create 3 different numbering levels. So our first numbering level, let's click the drop down. We're going to say that we want numbers. The length, well, let's go for 3 digits, and the separator is going to be, let's say, a /. So that is my first level of numbering. And you can see in the code preview at the top what that's going to look like. So it's going to say HB01-111. Because I've chosen numbers, it's going to start at 1, the length is 3, and when we move on to the next level, the separator is going to be a /. Our next level of numbering, let's do these in uppercase. The length this time is going to be 1 character, and the separator is going to be a dot. And then our third level is going to be ordered numbers again. And this time we're going to have 2 characters. And we're not going to have a separator on the end. Now, before we click on OK, let's just take a look at these 2 little checkbox options that we have at the bottom. We have Generate WBS Code for New Task selected. So when we add new tasks into the schedule, it's going to generate a brand new WBS code for that task. And then the second option, verify the uniqueness of the new WBS code. So basically, Project is going to check against the list to make sure that the WBS code we're using is a unique code. So I'm happy with this. Let's click on OK and check out our schedule. So now we have our WBS style numbering applied. Once again, if you take a look at this trim task, you can see that it seems to be out of order because it's not really flowing through with its numbering system. Now we're going to talk about why that is in the next lesson, so I'm going to hop over there now and I look forward to you joining me. Previously, we looked at outline numbers and WBS codes. And we pointed out some problems in terms of producing a consistent and reliable way of identifying the tasks in a project and the structure of those tasks. Then we created custom WBS codes. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at some of the problems that we might encounter with outline numbers and WBS codes, because there are issues with both of them, just different issues. Now, it's important to remember that there is a fundamental difference between a situation where you are given codes to use and they need to be assigned to the tasks in a project in such a way that those codes never change, and the procedure whereby the tasks in a project are outline numbered in some way, and that numbering is updated when you update the structure or the contents of the project. So, do you want your codes to be fixed or flexible and adaptable as the project changes? So let's take a look at this in a bit more detail. So let's take a look at task number 11, lockup, and also task number 18, frame. Now, lockup has a WBS code of 003. We're just going to look at the last 3 numbers on the end here. And frame has a WBS code of 004. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drag frame above lockup. So let's grab the task, let's drag it up and drop it in there. Now, a couple of things to notice here. The first thing is the indentation. Notice that frame has effectively taken on the indentation of the summary task above, and the outline numbering reflects that as well. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is just outdent frame to give it its correct outline level. Now, notice here that when we've done this rearranging and made changes to this structure, the outline number has recovered well. We can see that everything still flows through, so frame is now outline number 3, 3.1, 3.2, all the way down to 3.4, and lockup has now changed to outline number 4, and all of its subtasks have the appropriate numbering level. But check out the WBS codes. This is an entirely different story. Effectively, the WBS codes have acted in the opposite way. So the lockup task and all of its subtasks have retained the original formatting. So it's still showing us 003, 003A, so on and so forth in the WBS code field, but the outline numbering is all related to the number 4. So the WBS code hasn't changed, whereas the outline numbering has. Now, if we take a look at the frame summary task and all of its subtasks, remember this is the one we moved above lockup, we now have some very strange numbering in here. We have HB01013, and that follows down throughout all of the subtasks. So why do we have 13 in here? Well, it's because Project views these as inserted tasks into the schedule and effectively treats them as if they are brand new tasks and assigns the next lot of WBS codes to them in the list. So if we scroll down to the bottom of this schedule, you can see that the last WBS code here for sign-off, task number 47, is HB01012, so 12. Now, because Project is treating these tasks as brand new tasks, it's assigned them the next set of WBS codes in the list, which is 13. And you'll also see, if you look down that WBS column, that we now no longer have any WBS codes that relate to 004. We have our ones for 003 just here, and then our ones for 005. And that's because in here is where we had that frame summary task with its subtasks. That was the one that we moved further up the schedule. So outline numbers and WBS codes behave in very different ways when you change the structure of your project. So let's grab the frame summary task again and let's move it back to where it was and see what happens to the schedule. So let's grab it and move it all the way down to here. And once again, I'm just going to need to outden the summary task so it doesn't take on the indentation of the tasks above. So once again, you can see that the outline number has updated, but the WBS code has remained static. Now, let's say that when we've done this, we don't particularly like the way that these WBS codes have been handled. Well, fortunately, there is a way that we can get around this. All we need to do is right-click on the summary task and jump into information. And we're going to jump across to the custom field tab, and you can see here is our WBS code. So what I could do is simply manually change this from here if I didn't like the WBS code that had been assigned. So I'm going to change this to the value. Let's put it back to 004. Click on OK. And if you now take a look at the schedule where we have frame, we now have those codes looking as we need them to look. Now, it might be that we get into a situation where we're renumbering different WBS codes and maybe we get ourselves into a bit of a mix-up and we just want to reset everything back to how it was. Fortunately, we have a button which will help us with this. So if we go up to Project and into WBS, we have a renumber option just here. And that will reset all of your numbering back to how it was originally. In this lesson, we're going to look at outline codes. So far, we've been talking about the structure of a project, and we've looked at outline numbering and the WBS codes that reflect the structure. Now, there are many other ways that you can add structure to projects. And we're going to proceed in this lesson by going back to the NFF website project. If you recall, this is the project for Farm Foods, where we've basically outlined the structure for building a website. Now this time we're going to do something a little bit different because what we want to do is to reflect the requirements of an accountant. Now the accountant wants to be able to identify cost centers and cost center structures for the resources assigned to this project. So we need to set up a structure which reflects how we charge for the use of these resources. So in this example, we aren't looking at a task structure, we're looking at a resource structure instead. Now, the project accountant has told us that we need to be able to identify which of the internal resources are chargeable and which are non-chargeable. So we just need to create a simple structure that clarifies the charging within the project. Now, if you take a look at the first resource in the resource sheet, it says Northern Farm Foods. Now, Northern Farm Foods is essentially the client. And as the client, we don't have to pay them to do what they're doing. So let's take a quick look at the types of tasks that the Northern Farm Foods client is performing within this project. So we're going to jump up to resource usage, and there is Northern Farm Foods, and we can see here that they are involved in the requirements definition, the analysis and design, and also the testing. Now, as the client, we don't have to pay them to do what they're doing. Their contribution to this project is part of the commercial arrangement that we have with the client. Now, if we take a look at Mark Ravenswood, I can see that he's in charge of the coding side of things. So he's going to be writing all of the HTML. Now, Mark Ravenswood is an internal salaried member of staff. So the department won't be charging for his time. The same thing applies to Sally Danvers. She's an internal member of staff as well, and her time is not chargeable because this is effectively part of her job. She's been assigned to this project to carry out these specific tasks. And for Sally, that is the analysis and design. Now, Lorraine Reese is a slightly different scenario. Lorraine, again, is an internal member of staff. She's been brought in to help with the testing of the scripts, but her time is chargeable. So we're going to set up an outline code structure to reflect all of these different scenarios. So let's jump up to the project tab. We're going to go into custom fields. So we're going to make sure that we select resource at the top here, and the type we're going to change to outline code. So this little custom fields window should look reasonably familiar to you now because we have used it a couple of times throughout the balance of this course. So let's rename our field, and this time we're going to call it charge code and click on OK. Now take a look down in the custom attributes section. You can see that none and formula are both grayed out, so they're inaccessible to me at the moment. The only option we have in here is lookup, which is fortunate because that's the option we need. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to define our code mask. So this is really the structure that the charge code is going to take on. So if we click on edit mask, this is where we can define our charge code structure. So we're going to say that there are going to be 2 levels to our charge code. The first level is going to be characters. The length is going to be 3, and we're going to have a dot separator. The second level is also going to be characters, and the length is also going to be 3. And you can see just above in the code preview what that's going to look like. So let's click on OK. Now that we have our code mask, our structure, we can start to add our values in. So our first value, which is going to be 3 characters, is INT. And the description, internal resource. Our second value is going to be CHG for chargeable. And then our third value is going to be for non-chargeable. Now we're going to do exactly the same, but for external resources as well. So we're going to have EXT, we're going to have CHG again. Now notice as soon as I type that, it appears in red because project is recognizing that we already have CHG as a value. Now we're not going to worry about that too much right now because this will change when we adjust the indentation. So let's just finish off what we're doing here. And the final one again for external resources is non-chargeable. So now what we can do is we can use our indentations at the top here to give this a little bit of structure. So I basically want this one to be indented, so it's under internal, along with this one as well. And we want to do the same for the other 2. Notice how that now we've added that indentation, project is recognizing that these are not actually duplicates. Now, if we take a look at some of the other options underneath, we're pretty much going to leave everything on the default settings here. So we want to display the indenting in the lookup table. So I always like to have this turned on because it just makes it easier to see what you're selecting. Use a value from the table as the default entry for the field. Now, I'm not going to set a default, so I'm going to leave that blank. Display order for the lookup table. Well, I'm happy displaying it by row number. And when it comes to our data entry options, I don't want to select either of these because I don't want to allow additional items to be entered into the fields. And I don't want to allow only codes that have no subordinate values. So we're basically going to leave these as default, click on close and OK. So now what we're going to do here is we're going to insert a column and we're going to display our custom field. There it is just there, charge code outline level 1. And now we can go through and assign different charge codes to different resources. So if we go for the client first of all and click the little drop down, there is our little table. And you can see some of those options that we selected coming into play. We can see that we've got our indentation in place, so it's easier to identify what we're selecting. So Northern Farm Foods is external, non-chargeable. Mark Ravenswood, well, as we mentioned, he is internal and non-chargeable, as is Sally Danvers. Lorraine Reese, she's internal, but she is chargeable. And I'm basically going to go through the rest of these resources, just assigning a charge code for each. So let's say that Adrian is internal, non-chargeable. Bakersfield Associates, well, they are external and chargeable. People for People, they are also external and chargeable. Deborah Ashby, well, she is internal and non-chargeable. And that is all I'm going to fill in there. So now if we jump back to the resource sheet, we can add a column into here as well, so we can see those different charge codes. And that could be a really useful column to add to this resource sheet. So let's click Add New Column. Once again, we're going to find our charge code column. And there we have all of those charge codes listed out. Now, the very final thing that I want to show you in this particular lesson is how the new charge code will enable the accountant to analyze the resource costs on this project. So for this, we're going to jump up to the View tab. We're going to go into the data group, and where we have group by, we're going to create a new group. And in the field name, we're going to say that we want to group by, and then we're going to choose the new field that we created. So this one here, group by charge code. Now you could modify the formatting that you're applying. Down here, for this example, I'm just going to leave it on the defaults and click on Apply. Now check out what happens. You can see that our resources have been grouped by charge code. So at the top, we have all of the resources that currently don't have a value, but we can also see all of the external resources grouped together and all of the internal resources grouped together, and they are separated into groups depending on if they are chargeable or non-chargeable. So this can be really helpful to accountants when they're trying to analyze the costs of a project. It's time now for us to complete exercise 4. And in this exercise, we are back to working on our web development project. And I've updated it a little bit, and the starting point you're going to find in the exercise files folder. The file name is exercise4.mpp. And if you take a look at this file and jump across to Resource Usage View, you can see that the charge code custom field that we created in the previous lesson is still there. If you recall, this is the one that we set up to assist the accountant. Now, in this exercise, we're going to practice custom fields, but we're going to shift our focus back to custom fields for tasks. So we're going to use a custom field of the type outline code to reflect the structure of the project. And remember that the difference when using outline codes is that project doesn't maintain the values for us. We must enter the values into the custom field. So we want to put in a structure into this project that is fixed and under control. So let me just show you my answer, and then I'll explain some of the specific requirements for this exercise. So this is my answer. You can see here that we have a custom column called Web Dev Project Code, and then underneath we have a code for each of the different tasks and summary tasks in the project. Now, if we click, notice that we have a drop down just here where we can see a list of all of those values. Now, notice that we only have 5 levels, but the third level, design and development, is split into 2 parts. We have 001 and 002. And hopefully you should recall from the previous lessons how we actually set up this drop down list and how we can create these sub levels. So in this exercise, I'd like you to create a custom field called Web Dev Proj Code. I'd like you to set it up as I've got it set up here. And then I'd like you to go through, make sure that you can see the Web Dev Project Code field in the Gantt chart view, and assign the relevant project code to each summary task and task within the project. So that is your exercise. Give it a go, and I will see you in the next lesson. In this and the next sections, we're going to take a look at costs. And I'm going to assume that you have a basic knowledge of using costs in a project. But we are going to look at some of the aspects that you might not have come across before. And in this first section, we're going to take a look at fixed task costs. Now, for many of the projects that you manage, a large proportion of the costs will be related to the costs of resources and materials. But sometimes you're going to have fixed costs for specific tasks. So we're going to start with the example of our building project. Now, if we scroll down to the services section, you can see that task number 32 is the connect to services task. And for this particular type of task, there might be a fixed cost aspect. For example, there might be a cost in connecting the house supplies to the services, so things like electricity and water. So in this case, we're going to assume that the fixed cost is $295. Now, this isn't a cost of a specific resource or material, it's a cost associated with the specific task of connecting to services. So when we're entering the fixed cost, we need to enter it via the cost table. So let's jump up to the View tab. Over in the data group, we're going to click Tables, and we're going to make sure that we select the cost table. And you can see here is the task in question, task number 32. Now, if you just take a look at the different column headings within the cost table, the first column is the fixed cost column. We then have fixed cost accrual, which is related to when this cost is implemented. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on. We have total cost, baseline, and then we have variance. So what I'm going to do here is in the fixed cost column, we're simply going to enter in $295. We then need to complete the fixed cost accrual method. And we have three options in here: start, prorated, and end. Now, as I mentioned, we are going to talk a bit more about this later on. So for the time being, we're just going to set this to start, which basically means that the cost is going to be accrued at the start of the task. So now we've entered this information, you can see that the total cost has updated to $295. You can also see that's rolled up to the summary task of services. We have nothing for baseline, which is fine because we haven't set a baseline as yet. And the variance is $295 as well. Now, if you have assigned a fixed cost to a task, you can still assign other costs to the same task. For example, if a member of my team had to spend time getting involved in this task, that can still be added to the cost of this task. So I've switched across to the website project, and you'll notice that one of the tasks in this project has a fixed cost of $2,000. Task number 2, tendering process. Now, one really important point that's worth bearing in mind is that it's only possible to record one fixed cost against a task. If you have more than one to apply, you would add the costs together to get a total and add it into the fixed cost column. And if you are going to do something like that, it's always good to add a note so that everybody knows what's going on with these fixed costs. So what we could do here, for example, is we could select the task. Let's right click and go into information. And then if we click across to the notes tab, this is where we could add some notes, just letting everybody know what each of the fixed costs are for. So there's my description for the $2,000 fixed costs. If I had added multiple fixed costs together into one total, I could carry on listing them out here so everybody is aware. Now, there is another case that can sometimes occur. Let's suppose you are getting external consultancy from an expert. And in the case of this tendering process task, we need to appoint a consultant. Now, the consultant doesn't charge on an hourly basis, he charges a fixed cost. So what we can do is we can set up the work resource for the consultant on the basis that there isn't an hourly charge or cost, but there is a fixed cost charge for their services. So we can set this consultant up on the basis that their standard rate is 0, but there is a cost per use. So let's take a look at that. We're going to jump across to the resource sheet and we're going to add in our new resource. So this is going to be our contract consultant. Now we're going to say that his standard rate is $0 an hour. So I'm not going to change anything just there, but the cost per use is $400 an hour. So now let's go back to the Gantt chart. We're going to select this task and we're going to assign a resource to this task. And the resource that we're going to assign is the one that we've just added, which is the contract consultant, let's select them and click on Assign. So now you can see the total cost for this project is $3,200. Now, if we jump into the information for this task and take a look at the resources, you can see there are two resources now assigned to this task, Deborah Ashby and the contract consultant. The former has a cost of $800 and the latter has a cost of $400. So if we add these together, that's $1,200. Don't forget, we already have a fixed cost of $2,000 assigned to this project, so the total cost is $3,200. So that's how the breakdown of these costs work for this specific task. In this lesson, we're going to talk about cost accrual. And cost accrual might be something you're familiar with, it might not be. And for some people who aren't familiar with accounting, it can all seem like a little bit of a mystery. Now, we're going to work in this dummy project, and you can see the file there, costaccrualdemo.mpp. You can find this in the course files folder if you'd like to follow along with me. Now, in this dummy project, we simply have 5 tasks, task A to task E. We also have 5 dummy resources in the resource sheet as well, so resource 1 through to 5. And one thing to note about these resources is the accrue at column. You can see that a couple of them have an accrual method of prorated, 2 of them accrue at the start, and 1 of them accrues at the end. And when a cost accrues, it's basically the point in time in which the accounting function associated with the project recognizes that the cost has been incurred. For example, if we have a resource accruing using the prorated method, it means that the cost of that resource is spread across the duration of the project. If the cost incurs at the start, it means as soon as the task gets an actual start date, that's when the cost will accrue. And if a cost accrues at the end, then it means that cost will be incurred once the task has finished. So it's important to understand the difference between these accrual methods. Now, generally people recognize how cost accrual works in terms of labor costs. We would normally prorate the labor costs over the course of a task in which the labor is employed. But there are some exceptions. Now, if you take a look at this dummy project currently, we don't have any costs associated with any of these tasks. Now, we're going to go in and change that. For task A, we're going to add a fixed cost of $100. And we're going to say that this cost is incurred at the start. Now, one thing to notice here, you can see that we now have a total cost of 100, a variance of 100, but the actual is still at 0. For task B, let's also give this a fixed cost of 100, but we're going to leave this one on prorated. And then what I'm going to do is on the project tab, I'm going to set a status date. So I want to set the status date of today, which is March the 22nd. Let's click on OK. And I'm going to choose Update Project underneath. Let's update the entire project, click on OK, and check out what's happened here. If we take a look at task A, we still have our fixed cost of 100, but the actual is now also showing as 100. And that's because the cost accrues at the start of the task. If you take a look at the timeline, this task starts on March the 20th, which was actually 2 days ago. So as soon as I set the project date to update to today's date, it recognizes that this task has started, and so that cost is incurred. And that's why we're seeing the full amount, the full $100 in the actual column. Let's take a look at task B. Remember, we set this one to prorated. So this cost is going to be spread out over the lifetime of the task. So we have something slightly different in here. Our total cost is still $100. The variance is 100, but the actual is only $30. And if we double click to open up task B, we can see that this task is 30% complete. And that is effectively the charge that we've incurred so far for 30% of the project. Now, currently we don't have any resources assigned to these tasks. And I have 5 tasks and I also have 5 resources. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to go through and assign resource 1 to task A, resource 2 to task B, so on and so forth. So let's right click, go to assign resources. And for task A, we're going to assign resource 1. Let's click on assign. Now remember, you can leave this little window open when you're assigning these, which makes things a lot more efficient. So let's select resource 2 and assign. Going to go for task C is going to be resource 3. Task D, we're going to assign resource 4. And task E, we're going to assign resource 5. So now that we've assigned resources, you can see how that affects the cost that we have in our cost table. For task A, the total cost is now $2,100. We have a variance of $2,100 and an actual of $1,300. And if we double click to open up this task, we can see that the cost for resource 1 is $2,000. Now remember, if we go across to the resource sheet, resource 1 is set to accrue using the prorated method. So the resource is prorated, but the fixed cost is incurred at the start. So for task A, we've incurred the whole of the fixed cost for task A, but now we have 8 hours of work at $50 an hour for resource 1, whose cost is accrued pro rata throughout the project. For task B, we've accrued a third of the fixed cost because it's prorated, but we've incurred all of the costs for resource 2 because if we check this out, you can see that that's set to accrue at the start. And resource 2 is working on a standard rate of $60 an hour. So you can see how these changes are affecting the actual costs we see on the schedule. And that is why it's so important to understand if costs are accrued at the start, at the finish, or if they're prorated across the span of the project. And the final thing I really want to point out here is something within the options. So if we go to File and down to Options, let's go across to the Schedule page. Right at the bottom, you'll see it says Default Fixed Cost Accrual, and it's set to prorated. So this is the default if you don't change this to anything else. Now, of course, you can click the drop down and you can choose start or end if that is your preferred method. In general, I leave mine on prorated, and then if I need to change anything, I can just manually change it in the costs table. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at budget costs. And I'm going to explain to you why people use budget costs, why you may want to use budget costs, and how you can compare progress on a project with a project budget with specific reference to costs. Now, it's probably a good stage to point out that you can do exactly the same thing with budget work. The approach is very similar. So we're back working in our house build project. If you'd like to follow along with me, we're working in house build 4. And currently we're looking at tasks for Burlington House A, and I simply have all of the tasks collapsed up so we can just see their summary tasks at the top. Also notice that currently we don't have any costs associated with this project. If we jump across to the resource sheet, we also don't have any resources listed currently. Now, we might need to prepare a budget, and this in general wouldn't relate to any particularly accurate estimates of costs, but I might say, for example, that I think the labour costs on this project are going to be $40,000. Possibly the material costs are going to be $30,000, and the legal costs are going to be $10,000, and so on. So these are just very rough estimates. Now, I also might come up with some budget figures, and then during the course of the project, I'm going to want to see how the costs are progressing in terms of budget. Now, rather than do all of those things, I'm going to take one element and show you how to deal with it. And the final thing to point out here is that you shouldn't confuse budget costs with baseline costs. A baseline is a saved copy of a schedule at a specific point in time, and that will include everything that's been added. Budget costs are assigned at the project level, and although we can compare the budget cost with our actual costs, it's not the same as comparing actuals with a baseline. Now, we're going to use the example of setting up a budget cost for connecting to the services. So maybe this particular task involves connecting the house up to the relevant services, but also getting a building inspector to come round and inspect the building. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up a resource, and that resource name is going to be service costs. We're going to give it a type of cost. Let's give it some initials. I'm just going to call this serve costs. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little group. So we're going to call this service costs group. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to double click to open up this resource, and on the General tab, notice over on the right hand side we have a little budget checkbox. So we're going to select this and click on OK. And now I'm basically going to assign this resource to the entire project. Now, when you're trying to assign resources to an entire project, you need to make sure that you have the top level summary task showing at the top here. So you can see that I do have mine, Burlington House A, but if you can't see this for whatever reason, you can simply jump into File, go down to Options, and on the Advanced tab, if you scroll down, this is what you're looking to select, Show Project Summary Task. So select that and it should reveal that top level summary task which controls the entire project and will always have a task number of 0. So let's right click and go to Assign Resources, and we can see our service costs resource that we just set up sitting right there. Now, because we also set this to budget, it means that we can't enter in any units and we can't enter in any cost. If I try and type, it just doesn't type anything. So the only thing we can really do here is click on the Assign button to assign it to the summary task. And it's worth noting that you can only assign it to the summary task as well. Now, once we have assigned it, we can then specify the cost in a number of different ways. We could jump across to Task Usage View, and you can see in here we have a budget cost column, and we could type in the service costs into here. So let's say that our estimate for this is going to be $500. And if we switch back to Gantt chart view, remember we're currently displaying the cost table, we can now see that budget cost listed in the budget cost column. Remember, if you can't see that column, you just need to insert a column and choose budget cost. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create 2 more resources that are going to be in the same category as that budget cost. If you recall, we created a group called Service Cost Group, so we're going to assign both of those resources to that same group. Now, we could do this using a code or a custom field, which we have seen earlier on in this course, but we're going to use the group that we created. So let's jump back across to our resource sheet, and I'm going to add in 2 more resources. So there are my 2 resources. We have the local inspector. So he's the one who's going to be carrying out the building inspection. And we also have the service company who are responsible for connecting up the services to the house. And you can see that both of those are of type cost. We have their initials and we've assigned them to the same group as the service costs. That is the service costs group. Also note the accrual method at the end. The first one is prorated, the second one accrues at the start, and the last one accrues at the end. So let's jump back to our Gantt chart view, and we're going to assign one of the resources to the Connect to Services task. So let's right click and go to Assign Resources. And we're going to assign the service company resource because these are the people who are in charge of connecting the services up to the house. And maybe we've determined that the cost for this is going to be $295. So let's enter that in, click on Assign, and you can now see that that cost is updated in the cost table. Now let's assign our second resource. So if we expand completion, you can see we have a task here called Final Inspection. So this is when we're going to need the building inspector. So let's right click and go to Assign Resources. We're going to select Local Inspector, and we're going to say that this cost is $265. Let's click on Assign. So against a budget of $500, you can now see that we have those 2 costs. And you can see right at the top where we have the summary task, Burlington House A, our budget cost is $500, but our total costs are currently coming in at $560. So how could we possibly start reporting on this type of information? Well, we could report on this using the group that we created, the service cost group, because all of these resources are now part of this same group. So if we jump up to Resource Usage View and go up to the data group, you can see we have a little group by field just here. So we're going to click the drop down and I'm going to say New Group By. So what we effectively want to do here is we want to group by the group that we created. Now you can give your group a name at the top here. I'm just going to leave it on the default, but where we have Group By, we can group by a specific field. So there's lots of different fields that we could group this by, but if you want to group it by the group that you've created, in this case the service costs group, we just simply need to type group in here. You can see at the top we have group no value, and these are all the ones that we haven't assigned to a group, but we also have a little bit further down group service costs group, and that's going to include all of those resources that we assigned to that specific group. So now we can see very clearly our budget cost, and our actual cost just here, and we can see that there is a difference there of $60. So that is a way that you can very easily report on the difference between your budget and your actual costs. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at cost rates and changes in cost rates. And you're already familiar with assigning resources, and we've already looked at calculations involving the cost of resources working on a task. Now, sometimes when you assign a resource to a task, there might be the added complication that the rate that you pay for that resource will depend on the task that the resource is being assigned to. Now, we're back in our Northern Farm Foods website, and we're going to jump across to the resource sheet. Now, if you take a look at the first resource just here for Northern Farm Foods, you can see that we have a standard rate of $35 an hour and an overtime rate of $35 an hour. And we're working on the basis here that everything is chargeable. And you can see here that for all of these resources, we have a standard rate and we also have an overtime rate. Now, the contract consultant at the bottom, this is slightly different. You can see that we have a cost per use charge here of $400 instead. Now, when you set these resources up, those rates that you can see in these columns, those are the default rates, or what we call the A rates. For example, if we open up Mark Ravenswood and take a look at the cost tab, you can see here we have a number of different tabs. We have A, which is the default, B, C, D, and E. And the A rate here, we can see the standard rate and the overtime rate that is displayed in the resource table behind. But in addition, Mark could have other rates assigned to him. So he might have a B rate, a C rate, a D rate, or an E rate. And we can schedule changes to any of those rates. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this a bit later on. For the time being, just get the concept that the default is what we call the A rate, but we can have other rates for each resource. So let's just click on OK to come out of there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump across to the resource usage view. And if we look down our list of resources, there is Mark Ravenswood, and I can see that he only has one task assigned to him. He's in charge of all of the HTML coding. Whereas if we take a look at, let's say, Bakersfield Associates, you can see that they have a range of different tasks assigned to them. So analysis and design, graphical resources and branding, writing test scripts, and then testing. Now, if we double click on Bakersfield Associates and take a look at their costs, we can see here that their default rate, their A rate, they have a standard rate of $60 an hour and an overtime rate of $100 an hour. So it might be that this is what they charge for standard IT work. But maybe when it comes to something like graphical work, they could possibly charge a higher rate for that. So if we go across to the B tab, you can see that we have a higher rate in here. So the standard rate for graphical work is $100 an hour and the overtime rate is $150 an hour. So we effectively have two different rates that we can possibly use when we're assigning tasks for Bakersfield Associates. So let's click on OK, because what we're going to do next is we're going to add a column to the table, which makes it really easy for us to see which rate each resource is using for each task. So we're going to add a new column, and the one that we're looking for is cost rate table. And you can see that currently everybody is using the default cost rate, the A rate. So what I'm going to want to do here is for this task just here, the 60-hour task, we're going to change that to use B rate, that higher rate. So now that we've changed that, I'm going to add another column, and this time we're simply going to add the cost column. So now you can see if we take a look at these two down here, analysis and design is using the A rate. And if you remember, the A rate is $60 an hour. So if you were to calculate that, that works out to $6,120. Whereas for graphical resources and branding, we have almost half the work, but it's working out at $6,000 because we're using the B rate here, that higher rate. So we're basically doing $100 multiplied by 60, which gives us a cost of $6,000. So displaying both of these columns can be really helpful when you're trying to work out which rates resources are using. Now I'm going to briefly jump back just to Gantt chart view, because when it comes to assigning resources to tasks, there isn't an option in here where we can specify the rate table that we want them to use. It's always going to use the default of the A rate. But what we can do instead, if we jump across to Task Usage View, and let's just scroll down and find, let's say, Adrian Haskell just here. If we double click to open that up, notice we can specify what cost rate table we're using for this particular resource. So I can click the drop down and I can change it to whatever I like. But just remember that by default, everyone is going to use cost rate table A. So I'm going to change that to B and click on OK. Now, another situation that you'll probably encounter over the lifetime of your project is an increase in rates. People's prices ordinarily increase as opposed to decrease. So we need to know how to make those changes and reflect them in our project. So let's look again at Bakersfield Associates. And we can see that their A rate is $60 an hour and they have a B rate of $100 an hour. Now, maybe Bakersfield Associates have let us know that as of July the 17th, 2023, their rates are going to increase by $5 and $10 an hour. So what we can do in here is we can add another row to this table with the increase. So the effective date is going to be Monday, the 17th of July. The standard rate is going to increase by $5, so it's going to go up to $65, and the overtime rate is going to increase by $10, so it's going to go up to $110. Let's do the same for the B rate that we have in here as well. So those costs are going to increase on Monday, the 17th of July. The standard rate this time is going to be $105, and the overtime rate is going to be $160. Now, if you take a look at this, you can schedule changes to rates quite some time into the future because we have 25 different rows that we can add in here. And you could set them up and schedule them all in here so that as soon as that effective date comes around, the new rates come into play. And of course, when we click on OK, this is going to have an effect on the costs for those different tasks. And you can see those new costs reflected in the schedule. The final thing to point out here is let's open up Adrian Haskell again. And maybe we've been notified that Adrian's costs are going to increase by 5% on a particular date. So let's go in and I'm going to choose, let's just choose the same date. So we're going to say July the 17th. But this time we don't want to enter a monetary amount. We're not adding $5 or $10. We want to increase them by a percentage. So all we need to do here is type plus 5%. And Project 2021 is going to work that out for us. So you can see here it's calculated that that's going to be $52.50 and this charge will kick in on the 17th of July. We can do the same for the overtime rate. So let's do plus 10% for the overtime rate. And again, Project works it out for us. So once we've done this, these new costs are going to be reflected in the schedule going forward from whatever date we've set.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the course exercise files and follow along with this video, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Says It.